All right, guys. So Mauricio Pochettino has released his USMNT Camp cupcake roster. And as it was to be expected, there were some interesting names, or what I'll call players of interest. And there were, of course, lots of guys that we know should be nowhere near a national team. But we have created this, Camp cupcake with all of our best players abroad environment where we're going to have to call up players who probably don't deserve it or who don't really have any quality or future with the men's national team. But what I would like to do today is focus on the players that are here that I'm going to call players of interest. Now, players of interest doesn't mean that they are going to be a national team regular or that even that they have a high ceiling or high quality, but several things. One, they have to be under 23 or under 20, unless they're a goalkeeper, because, usually that's what MLS is good for. The developing the younger players, giving them a playing time platform before sending them to a serious league. Or a player of interest because they have real quality. And let's be honest, quality is quite short in this roster, but we expected this. Now, there are players of interest, so that's what this video is mainly going to be focused on. It's also tough to judge because there are some players that Poch wanted to bring that wouldn't get released even by their MLS clubs. So I know of a few, but I'm sure there were more. So it's hard to be too critical of this roster. I mean, I'm going to be critical about certain call-ups and explain why and what the alternatives were. But some of them I'll explain if I know that certain players were not released, and we'll take it from there. Before we get into it, though, use my code BELIEVE if you're using BetOnline and smash that like button. Smash subscribe if you're not already subscribed to the channel, and let's dig in. All right, so first we have the goalkeepers, Drake Callender, Zach Steffen, Matt Freese, and Patrick Schulte. So players of interest in this particular one would be Matt Freese and probably Patrick Schulte. I don't know how high Schulte's ceiling is, but of the MLS goalkeepers, he was probably the most impressive this year. Between him and Matt Freese, who had a really, really strong season with NYCFC. So these two are guys that, I hope maybe they get one game apiece. Schulte has looked shaky at times, which should tell you everything you need to know. When the best American goalkeeper in MLS looks shaky, then, that's kind of not great. Zach Steffen, I really don't understand why we continue to call him up. Wasn't good in Man City, wasn't good in Middlesbrough, and frankly, wasn't even good in MLS this year for Colorado Rapids, outside of a very short stint in that Leagues Cup. Right, but for most of the season was quite poor. Drake Callender, same goes for him. And Drake Callender, we know why he's here. Like, this is a Inter Miami call-up being pushed by the league. 27 years old, not a very good goalkeeper, made a few saves early on in his, MLS career at 25. So some people thought he might have been good. Look, the state of MLS goalkeeping, the state of the USMNT goalkeeping in general is quite poor. But the players of interest for this are Matt Freese and Patrick Schulte. I would probably give them one game apiece. And then, again, what are they fighting for? Second, third, maybe on the roster, on the actual senior team roster? I don't know, right? You've got Matt Turner, Ethan Horvath, Patrick Schulte has been the guys that he's used, but, Horvath is not playing. Everybody's just kind of holding space for, a guy like Diego Cochin. Speaking of other goalkeepers that should have been here, there is Chris Brady, who should have been here over Zach Steffen, absolutely, and Gavin Beaver should have been here over Drake Callender. Young, promising goalkeepers, as opposed to these MLS lifer guys who we already know are not good, and yet they just keep on getting call-ups. Fullbacks now. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Caleb Wiley would have been in this, obviously, but he's not here. He went to Europe. Dewan Jones and Max Arsteffen and Shaquille Moore and John Tolkien are the players that were called up as fullbacks. Now, a little bit of tidbit. Nathan Harriel, from what I understand, Nathan Harriel was supposed to be called up, but for whatever reason, the Philadelphia Union declined, both for him and Quinn Sullivan, which is unusual because they didn't actually used to decline national team call-ups. But, like most people, they've probably come to the realization that this is a very meaningless camp, and they'd rather have their players with them for preseason. Interestingly, though, they did release Jack McGlynn, which tells me Jack McGlynn might be on his way to Europe this January. Now, with Nathan Harriel not there and Reed Baker-Whitting probably with the under-20s, there's going to be an under-20 roster as well. So I'm guessing otherwise Reed Baker-Whitting would have been the guy to bring in here. played a lot of minutes for Seattle this last season and is young, promising right back. Max Arfsteffen, Max Artston is playing wingback for the Columbus Crew, 23 years old, not somebody I'm particularly excited about. Daewon Jones, I mean, he's a journeyman MLS left back, but, is at least versatile, can play right or left. The less said about Shaquille Moore, the better. But again, all our good right backs are abroad, right? Serginho Dest, Joe Scally, Brian Reynolds, Marlon Fossey. Those are the right backs that are in contention for the senior team. So if you take Nathan Harriel now out of that and you take Reed Baker-Whitting out of the mix, this is what you're going to end up with, Shaq Moore and Max Arfstein. John Tolkien is the player of interest in this group, I think, because he is still fighting, Christopher Lund and Caleb Wiley to be that backup to A-Rob. We are apparently not interested in recruiting Nathaniel Brown, which is unfortunate, but that makes John Tolkien, who's now almost a vet with 5 years in MLS at 22 years old. Personally, I think he needs to leave if he really wants to challenge for that spot. And it'll be interesting to see what he looks like in this camp. We probably won't read too much into it, but in terms of players of interest, because of the position he plays, although I'm not his biggest fan, he is the only player of interest that I'm actually curious watching in this camp from the fullback group. Center backs now, and boy, did we screw this one up. Jalen Neal, Walker Zimmerman, Tim Ream, Miles Robinson, and George Campbell. Jalen Neal just made that move to Montreal, not FC Cincinnati. And, Tim Ream is obviously there because he's with the senior team. Walker Zimmerman, Miles Robinson. I mean, the amount of call-ups these guys get just by staying in MLS instead of actually, pushing themselves and becoming, good center backs is hilarious, but not at all surprising. Again, there also weren't a ton of options, although I would make a case for a Noah Cobb. A guy like Noah Cobb from Atlanta, who played lots of minutes with them this year, is far from the finished product, but at least is a young, high ceiling might be a stretch. The difference is with a 19 or 20-year-old center back, I think he's 18, you have a guy that could become really good. Now, Jalen Neal hasn't had a great season with the Galaxy, was benched for Garces, and is now been traded to Montreal. I actually think that's the right move for him. Sometimes with young players, they need to get out of their comfort zone a little bit and maybe sort of have a refresh in their career. And maybe was a little bit too comfortable as a homegrown player there in LA. And so I'm hoping that move to Montreal can help him out. I don't really have high expectations of George Campbell. But again, considering the lack of center back options, look, we have got a lot of good young center backs coming up through European academies, whether it's Noah Kai Banks, Grayson DeToni, who just got minutes with Bayern's first team this morning in a friendly. Obviously, there's Josh Winder, somebody that we can, kind of continue to watch out for. Mattia Kimbani, who now just moved to Bournemouth. So there are young center back options that could be quite interesting. Calling up all these MLS lifers is really, really counterproductive in my opinion, but we're going to do what we're going to do. And it's just, I think people are going to pay less and less attention to these January camp cupcakes because of the players that get called in. Like we know, go look at the roster from last year. Half of the players never got called up again, and deservedly so. Midfielders is interesting because for some reason, Poch only called up 4. Diego Luna, Jack McGlynn, Ben Kramaski, and Emeka Eneli. I don't understand that one at all, but the other 3 are interesting players. They fit the profile, young, right? Under 23, or in Kramaski's case, under 20. And, do they have high ceilings? I don't know about that. But at least these are young, promising players that with the right move to Europe could actually become maybe like a Gianluca Busio or better even. In Jack McGlynn's case, I think it's time for him to move on. Him and Luna both. I think it's time for both of them to move on. Well, Pete, who else could have we brought into this group? I think Emeka Eneli, some random 25-year-old from Real Salt Lake. It's like, what is the point of that? How about Daniel Edelman as a 6? Look, I'm not his biggest fan either, but he helped lead, the Red Bulls to an MLS Cup final. How about Edwin Cerrito? How about Cole Bassett, who actually had a very good season with the Colorado Rapids and is still just 22 years old? So I don't really understand. Now, maybe Cole Bassett was not released. I find that surprising because Zach Steffen was released. I really don't see whatever they're seeing in Emeka and Ellie, and I think Poch is finally going to get a chance to see some of these guys up close and go, oh. Personally, I don't think Poch rates MLS that much. Whatever he says, his actions seem to indicate he's not really that fond of it, and frankly, I don't blame him. When you look around at the talent that is there in MLS, there are a few young prospects, but all the good ones move on pretty quickly, and it's time for some of these guys to go as well. Wide forwards now, and this one made me chuckle. Brian Gutierrez, Patrick Agyemang, Indiana Vasilev, Matko Miljevic, bad boy, and Caden Clark. Now, the two players of interest here are Brian Gutierrez and Caden Clark. Gutierrez has not always gotten the love that I think he deserved, despite playing for a very poor Chicago Fire team, has generally been quite productive for them. And Caden Clark had a rough couple of years, but is finally feels like has found a home over at Montreal, and at 21 years old, if he's focused, can still make a career for himself. Matko Miljevic, we knew about his call-up for a long time. He's a very bizarre Argentine, I think Serbian American Trinat who was not good in MLS when he played for Montreal. Ended up registering in some sort of amateur tournament and then got red carded for like hitting a player or spitting on a player. Has had discipline issues over in Newell's Old Boys where he was playing and has now been released by them. Very, very, very bizarre call-up. Indiana Vasilev, 9 goal contributions at 23 years old. Not anything interesting. Same with Patrick Agyemang, 24 years old. I think 13 goal contribute. Like, again, these are all just mediocre mid-MLS lifers. So for me, the players of interest here are Gutierrez and Clark. Gutierrez can play wide, can also play central. Same for Caden Clark. I'm guessing Poch is probably going to use, George Campbell as a midfielder because this is a very, very weird midfield group. Like, it's very sparse. We have 2 games. So I'm guessing maybe he sees Gutierrez centrally, maybe Caden Clark centrally, maybe George Campbell as a 6. Maybe Jalen Neal as a 6. He's good on the ball. It'll be interesting to see what Poch does in these 2 games or not. And then forwards, we have El Pirata of the Caribbean, Jesus Ferreira, who just made a lateral move from Dallas to Seattle, and MLS journeyman Brian White from the Vancouver Whitecaps, who at 28 years old has 1 cap. These guys, I mean, look, we all know who Jesus is. Absolutely killer against tiny island nations, but against any real quality, looks like the player that he is, which is frankly a not very good one. So it'll be interesting to see how he does over in Seattle. He took the bag, and honestly, I don't blame him. If you want to play for the national team, he should have at least tried to move and maybe pushed himself in the Eredivisie. But he decided to stay in MLS and collect his money, and that's fine. He should not be, nor will he be in the rotation for the actual national team going forward. But also, what's interesting about this forward group is the lack of Brandon Vasquez. Now, did Austin decide not to release Brandon Vasquez, having just brought him over from Monterrey for the whopping sum of $10 million? That's a lot of money for somebody who's essentially had 1 good season their entire career and is 26 years old. Or did Poch just see enough of Brandon Vasquez in the last few camps and the absolutely terrible performances he put out? I think he missed like 3 or 4 chances to score in the 2 games that he played and didn't look very good. So is Poch just been like, I've seen enough from this guy? Well, if you've seen enough from Brandon, you're about to see a lot from a lot of these players. Like I said, if I had to make a lineup from this group, it isn't great, but I'd probably go Dewan Jones at right back, Matt Friesen goal, John Tolkien at left back, George Campbell and Jalen Neal at center back. Midfield, probably just go McGlynn, Luna, and Kremaski, all 3 of them together. On the wings, I'd probably go Brian Gutierrez and Caden Clark. And then I guess Jesus up top. There's just not a lot of great options in this group. Total of guys that I'm curious to see how they do, it's Gutierrez and Clark, obviously. McGlynn, Kremaski, Luna. Luna's probably the most interesting one. Neal, Tolkien, and a goalkeeper. So out of 24, there's probably 8 or 9 that are what I would call players of interest. But this is just my point of view. And I'm sure if you're a fan of Charlotte or the Columbus Crew, you're going to come at me. They did this last year with that, FC Cincinnati had some other Ian, I don't remember his last name, but some other center back started with Ian, and he got called up. And I was like, what are we doing? Some, FC Cincinnati fans were like, no, he's good. Whether they're good, they're not good. This is Camp Cupcake, guys. This is not anything to take too seriously. It's essentially become an MLS promotion tour. I think it should be an under 23, under 20 camp, but we have under 20 camps going on simultaneously, so that makes it hard. Anyways, that's my thought on the roster. We'll cover it as usual, but I'm not really expecting anything too interesting out of this camp in terms of how it relates to the actual senior team. So thanks for watching, guys. Smash the like button before you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Talk to you soon.